Chapter 24, Confessions. On Saturday morning, the photo club accompanied Miss Bethuna to the Barge train station. Everyone was there except for Ravi, whose mother thought the city was too dangerous. Bundled in a second-hand wool coat and gloves that were too big, Faddy loosened his scratchy scarf. He'd begun to feel like a lobster slowly being steamed. Miss Bethuna had warned them to dress in layers since the San Francisco Bay Area was a patchwork of microclimates. While Fremont was a balmy 65 degrees in December, San Francisco, sitting next to the foggy Pacific Ocean, could be closer to 30. Faddy stood on the platform and peered down at the tracks. A third rail ran along, providing 900 volts of electricity to the trains. I wouldn't want to fall on that, he thought with a morbid shiver. He glanced over at Miss Bethuna. Her bright red lips moved as she counted heads, making sure all 11 of them were together. Her eyes landed on him and she gave him a slow wink. Faddy smiled back, exchanging a look of understanding. The day after he and the Brotherhood, as Faddy had called them, had thrown Ike and Felix into the lake, he'd trudged a familiar path to the art studio. With roses in hand taken from Dada's garden, he'd stood in front of Miss Bethuna's desk, his head bowed in shame. "Miss Bethuna," he said, "I'm sorry for the way I acted yesterday." Miss Bethuna took the flowers and pointed for him to sit across the desk. "Well, I was surprised at your reaction," she said, giving him a questioning look. "This is it. I have to tell her," thought Faddy. "I owe her the truth." He swallowed. His tongue felt like it was coated in peanut butter. "It's just that it was very important that I win the competition." "I see," said Miss Bethuna. Her bright silver bangles jangled as she folded her hands across the desk. Faddy took a deep breath and told her the story of Mariam's loss. With each passing minute, Miss Bethuna's face sagged and her eyes filled with tears. She kept saying, "How awful," in shocked tones. At one point she reached for a sheet of felt and blew her nose. "But that's not all of it," whispered Faddy, his own eyes bright. "What is it, Faddy?" prodded Miss Bethuna. A great weight shifted across Faddy's chest, constricting his lungs. He inhaled. The air caught in his throat. "You see," he began, then paused. Miss Bethuna pursed her lips and nodded, urging him to continue. "Tell her. You've got to," thought Faddy. Clearing his throat, he continued. "As we were running to catch the truck, Mariam, she was with me. She was my responsibility, and she stopped. She wanted me to put her Barbie in my backpack, but we didn't have time. Suddenly the Taliban showed up. We ran, but the crowd, there were just so many people, and I let go of her hand and she fell." Miss Bethuna's eyes widened. "So you see, it's my fault she was left behind. I'm responsible." "Here it is," thought Faddy. He lowered his eyes to Miss Bethuna's long brown fingers and braced himself. "She's going to blame me." "Faddy!" exclaimed Miss Bethuna. He looked up in surprise. She sounded sad, not angry. 2 spots of colour burned on her cheeks. "You can't think that way." Faddy stiffened in surprise. He looked at her, his mouth open. It's not your fault that poor Mariam was lost." But how can you say that, Miss Bethuna?" stammered Faddy. "I was responsible for her. I was the one holding her hand. If I'd put that stupid Barbie in my backpack, Mariam would be here." "Look, honey," she said, leaning across the desk. "Bad things happen to good people, and you were in a bad situation. What if you had stopped to put that darn Barbie in your bag and both of you had been left behind?" "Oh," said Faddy. "I hadn't thought of it that way." "You can't second-guess yourself. It was fate that determined how things turned out." Faddy nodded, his mind a jumble of disjointed thoughts. Maybe it wasn't really his fault. The situation had been out of his control. Fate, as Miss Bethuna had said. "Now I know why those plane tickets were so important to you." Faddy nodded. An overwhelming sense of relief flooded through his body and he felt disjointed, like a bowl of overturned jello, jiggly and without structure. Although he still felt partially responsible for Mariam's loss, he was glad he'd finally told someone the truth of what had happened. As Fadley shakily got up to leave, Miss Bethuna gave him a hug. "Now, Thaddy, I've had a thought," said Miss Bethuna, tapping a burgundy fingernail on her chin. "Why don't we have a fundraiser for you?" At Thaddy's confused look, she continued, "We can collect money for a plane ticket to Peshawar." "Can we really do that?" asked Thaddy, a hope flaring in his chest. "I don't see why not. We have collection jars, car washes, bingo nights, all sort of fundraisers at the school for different causes. I think the students and faculty would love to pitch in and help find Mariam." With a dazed smile, Thaddy thanked Miss Bethuna and headed home, a new spring in his step. Thaddy later shared the idea with Arne, and she thought it was brilliant. Her new project was to take on the Bring Mariam Home campaign. It might take months of bake sales and car washes, but maybe, just maybe, they could raise the money. One ticket for Habib. Thaddy knew that it should be his father who brought Mariam home. Thaddy would do his part to raise the money, but his father would be the one who found her. Then both would have their honour restored. As he walked home after school, there was an ease to his step that had been missing for months, but guilt still ate at his conscience. He had to tell his family, tell them it wasn't their fault Mariam was lost. A series of loud beeps interrupted his thoughts, announcing an oncoming train, along with the flashing electronic destination sign announcing Oakland, San Francisco. Thaddy stepped back as the silver train pulled into the station, sending a burst of wind whipping through his hair. Arne's patent leather shoes shone in the sun as she practically skipped through the doorway. Thaddy trudged behind, and they grabbed seats next to the window. With a resigned sigh, Thaddy watched Fremont zip by. "This'll be fun, you'll see," said Arne. She passed Thaddy a piece of licorice from the stock of candy she'd packed for the trip. Thaddy took it and stuck it into his mouth. "If you say so," he mumbled between chews. He hadn't wanted to go, but Arne had nagged him every day till he'd gotten his father to sign his consent form. He'd realised that if he'd acted like a sore loser, he wouldn't be able to celebrate Arne's victory. As the spicy flavour of anise spread over his taste buds, his mind floated back to the conversation with his father earlier in the week. With dinner over, Safuna and Noor had gone to visit Carl and Alutha, but Thaddy had stayed, using the excuse that he had too much maths homework. As raindrops beat against the window, Thaddy and his father put together a snack for themselves in the warm comfort of the kitchen. For Thaddy, it was his usual, a sliced Twinkie spread with peanut butter and layered with a sliced banana. Habib took a handful of sugared almonds and made a pot of green tea. As Thaddy pulled a carton of milk from the fridge, he contemplated the best way to break the news to his father. He watched the pearly froth reach the rim of his glass and took a deep breath. "Just do it," he ordered. So he opened his mouth. "Dad," he began, "I found out that I didn't win the photography competition." "Oh," said Habib. He glanced over with a commiserating frown. "Well, you tried your best." "But my best wasn't good enough," thought Thaddy with a dull ache in his chest. "But Dad," said Thaddy, "you don't understand. I wasted $50 and didn't win the tickets to India." Habib chewed thoughtfully on an almond and pulled a volume of Rumi's poetry from a row of books next to the microwave. "Tell me one thing," he said. "Did you enjoy taking those pictures? Did you learn anything?" Thaddy looked at his father's untroubled expression and paused in confusion. He recalled the thrill that had coursed through him when he'd spent the day in San Francisco with Habib walking up and down Fillmore Street. It had been a blast working with Arne, Abe and Dada on his second group of pictures. He'd also finally gotten the hang of taking pictures at dusk, which was really tricky. "Sure, I enjoyed it and I learned something new." "Well, that's the most important thing," said Habib. "Winning isn't everything, Thaddy-Jan. As Rumi says, when you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you, a joy. So Thaddy, you must do things that you love. You never know what rewards might come of it." Thaddy sighed at his father's philosophizing. But Dad, in this case winning was everything, he thought. He gathered the nerve to tell his father something else. Tell him about his role in Mariam's loss. But the tea kettle whistled and Habib turned away and Fadi lost his nerve. Even Noor hadn't batted an eyelid when he told her earlier in the day that he'd wasted her money. "Hey kid, you tried," she said, and with a toss of her hair she'd run out to work before he could bring up Mariam. Why did they have to be so understanding? They should have gotten pissed off at me, told me I was a loser. It's because they don't know it was me who lost Mariam, and now I've lost yet another chance to find her. Fadi looked out the train window and something stiffened inside him. I have to come clean. He'd been hiding the truth for too long, and it was rusting away his insides. Telling Miss Bethuna had been good, but he had to tell his family. Resolve crystallized within him. Where is my sense of honour? He sat up taller and straightened his spine. I'm going to tell father, mother and Noor. It was my fault. It was me who lost Mariam. When the family sat down around the table that night, he was going to tell them what had really happened and finally take responsibility for Mariam's loss.